Hello and welcome to episode 280 of AvTalk. I am Ian Petchnick here as always with
Jason Rabinowitz. Hello, Ian. How's it going?
Hello, Jason. It's who knows? Honestly, who knows how it's
If
going?
you don't, then nobody will. But we're recording about an hour later than usual, and no news is broken.
Don't say things like that.
8 minutes. So if it hasn't happened yet, it's not.
We're
going to happen.
28 seconds into the podcast, and you've already completely jinxed us.
Got to make it fun.
I suppose. Yeah, it's been a busy week. I keep waiting for the week where it's not a busy week. Like there's like a lull.
It's August. There's not supposed to be anything happening.
And yet. Yeah, I guess. I mean, so many things have happened today. We've reconfigured our lineup. I don't even know how many times, 3, 4 maybe. But there's a few major stories that are still developing. So talking about them today, Wednesday, and then having the podcast come out on Friday will probably either be wrong or at least a little behind the times. But we'll start with kind of developments in the Middle East and talk about what happened to really get everyone going this morning, which was Egypt, of all countries, putting out a NOTAM that said, if you're an Egyptian airline, don't fly through Iran between 0100 and 0400 on the 8th of August. So Thursday, yesterday, if you're listening when the podcast comes out on Friday. Obviously, the first thing that people jumped to was this relates to Iran's threat and retaliation against Israel, and something is going to happen. More reporting was done. People asked the Egyptians, hey, what's going on? And it turns out that this is just related to the pre-announced military exercises that are happening in Iran, and Egypt didn't want anyone from their airlines going anywhere near it, which is a bit interesting because there's one flight that could possibly be affected.
Just one?
By that NOTAM. One. There is a Red Sea Airlines flight that returns from Almaty to Sharm el-Sheikh that would be passing anywhere within Iran during that time period. Just one. And they went around Iran to the north on their way from Sharm el-Sheikh to Almaty. So they were already doing what the NOTAM was telling them to do anyway. So
great, then there's no problem.
Yeah, it's interesting to me that they put this out, that they specified such a narrow window. You know, there was a lot of speculation that this was some sort of, kind of pre-announcement. Last week, I think we talked about Jordan issuing a NOTAM that the commercial aircraft flying to Jordan need to carry 45 minutes of extra fuel. So that's 45 minutes on top of the reserve requirements and anything else they might be carrying. And Jordan was the first country in April to put out a NOTAM that said, hey, our airspace is closed when Iran launched its attack on Israel in April. So that's fine. Interesting bit of business today. People wondering what's going on. And for funsies, for reasons that I don't quite understand, the UK also updated their existing NOTAM that said, if you're a UK operator or operating a UK registered aircraft, be aware that Lebanon is a bit tense right now and know the risks. So that NOTAM went out in July. Today, they said, we are recommending that if you operate a UK registered aircraft, you don't fly in the Beirut FIR. So don't fly to Lebanon. Why they chose today to do that, I'm not sure, but it made my day much more interesting. But I will also mention that Canada issued nearly the exact same NOTAM on the 1st of August. So this isn't entirely out of the ordinary. So if you're a Canadian registered aircraft, don't fly in the Beirut FIR. Also worth noting, neither the UK nor Canada offer scheduled service to Lebanon.
All right. Well, it's better safe than sorry. I guess you never know when an airline might spin up a random charter flight to any random destination. It could happen, but doesn't hurt to have
Certainly
it.
Certainly with the UK charter operators. I mean, that's always a possibility.
It's always a possibility, however unlikely, but it never hurts to issue these things. It's just when they all come together at once like this, it definitely raises a lot of eyebrows and wakes Ian up in the middle of the night.
Luckily, I didn't get to wake up in the middle of the night last night, although I didn't have this on the thing. But speaking of the middle of the night, there was, and this happens all the time, but it was just fun to watch. there was a Cessna 172 that left Merced, California for Honolulu yesterday morning and landed yesterday evening in Honolulu after nearly 18 hours in the air.
Some say it's still on the way. I was watching that, and I do love how after all of that flying, like halfway across the Pacific Ocean, they got what looked to be a quite long approach into Honolulu. So even that was like, they're already there. They flown 18 hours, and then they have like a 20-mile final approach.
They're like, yeah, just keep going. Just keep going.
Guam's not that much further.
Yeah, just why not?
If you got enough fuel tanks on the plane, you can go anywhere.
And they do. So here's the thing. I was doing some research because we got some questions. We posted the flight and people asked some questions. And of course, the first question was not how do they do that, like technically speaking. The first question we, of course, got was, where do they pee? And
I mean, sure, the same could be asked of any truck driver, taxi driver, delivery person, I guess. Out the window, of course.
So, I mean, that was an interesting. But then I got, kind of on the rabbit hole of how does the ferry tank, because the basic answer is that there is a special ferry fuel tank or tanks or bladders added to the aircraft that are filled with fuel. And then they're removed when they get there.
When they get there, I think there's the famous pictures or the frequently seen pictures of the Hawaiian Airlines 717s that have no interior and just a bunch of fuel bladders on board.
Right.
I guess the same thing, just that a little one engine. This was a 172, was it?
Yeah, this was a 172.
A little one engine propeller, not even a turboprop, I don't think. That's a long way. But yeah, all those 717s, they got there somehow from the West Coast of the US, and that was just by putting a whole bunch more fuel than is typically an option on board.
And so it was interesting to kind of walk down that rabbit hole a little bit with how the fuel bladders are installed and the different types and things like that. So I'm going to look into that so that we can actually have a more learned conversation about ferrying and fuel and all that good fun stuff on a future episode. Hopefully we can talk to somebody who has done a few of these. Where should we go next? How about we go back a couple of weeks?
All right.
When we talked about Delta. And
I just flew them. It was not great. But it wasn't because
it wasn't because of the IT outage.
Because of SkyWest and their nonsense. Yeah. This is CrowdStrike and Microsoft. I would read what you have in the show notes here, but I don't think I'm allowed to say the words that you wrote here.
We are a family-friendly podcast. But the show notes list this topic as CrowdStrike and Microsoft tell Delta to sit down and, I will say, be quiet.
Yeah, pretty much.
So here's what happened. We talked about what happened to Delta. Their IT systems were more impacted than the IT systems of their peer airlines, shall we say. And they canceled thousands and thousands of flights over multiple days. Then Delta lawyers sent a letter to CrowdStrike and Microsoft saying, hey, we want some money and we're going to sue you if we don't get it. And that was not entirely unexpected, but CrowdStrike's letter in response was very interesting.
And why was it interesting?
Because CrowdStrike basically says, stop blaming us for your terrible IT infrastructure decisions. We offered to help, and we didn't hear back from you.
It's interesting. It tracks with a lot of what I think we've heard about Delta over the years, and especially after this, that there's an air of superiority to Delta and management there, that they're not always willing to listen to outside help and outside information and outside vendors. They always think they can do it better, they know it better. And we saw this in a completely different light with Delta flight products. Delta itself developed and rolled out its own in-flight seatback entertainment system. And apparently it didn't go well. It turns out this stuff is really difficult. And they have since stopped marketing that and stopped rolling it out to their own airplanes after the initial batches are going to be completed. So yeah, that kind of tracks it. Delta always thinks it knows a little bit better than everyone else. And sometimes they're proven wrong to the tune of, what did Delta say they were going to ask for? Like $500 million?
Yeah, it was $500 million.
No big deal.
So CrowdStrike sent a letter via their lawyers, which there's a couple points I want to bring out. So CrowdStrike basically said, okay, that's fine. We don't think you should be threatening to sue us. But if you do, here's what you are going to have to explain. Why Delta's competitors facing similar challenges all restored operations much faster. Why Delta turned down free on-site help from CrowdStrike professionals who assisted many other customers to restore operations much more quickly than Delta. That any liability by CrowdStrike is contractually capped at an amount in the single-digit millions. Every action or failure to act by Delta or its third-party service providers related to the channel file 291 incident, which is the issue at hand with the CrowdStrike software update, and the design and operational resilience capabilities of Delta's IT infrastructure, including decisions by Delta with respect to system upgrades and all other contributory factors that relate in any way to the damage Delta allegedly suffered.
Basically asking the same thing everyone else was asking of why was Delta so outsized?
What's your problem?
What's going on inside your own house that's making it so much worse than in every other house? We'd love to hear that answer because I would bet that this is going to end up in litigation and we're going to see some interesting documents come out in discovery if this does go to trial.
I don't know if they will litigate this because Microsoft didn't want to be left out because they got thrown under the bus by Delta too. And so Microsoft's CEO, Satya Nadella, emailed Bastion as well, offering his help, and then didn't hear back apparently. And then Microsoft issued its own public letter to Delta saying, quote, in fact, it is rapidly becoming apparent that Delta likely refused Microsoft's help because the IT system it was most having trouble restoring, its crew tracking and scheduling system, was being serviced by other technology providers such as IBM because it runs on those provider systems and not Microsoft Windows or Azure.
Okay, so it's a layered onion situation here. But you just got to keep peeling back the layers of ancient, neglected airline IT till you get to the root cause.
I mean, just wow.
Yeah.
I wish I could say I was surprised. And you'd think that airlines, and believe me, I know how hard it is to change infrastructure and make updates on systems that need to be online 100% of the time, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. I completely understand that. However, you would think that airlines by now, having seen other airlines suffer catastrophic meltdowns of their IT infrastructure. I'm not mentioning any names, but we already talked about the UK and their airline might be British Airways. But what I'm saying here is, having seen those, you'd think that the airlines would take this a bit more seriously.
Yeah, you would think so. But I think my favorite part of all of this is they say the CrowdStrike CEO, I think, emailed Ed Bastian, the CEO of Delta, to offer assistance. And I'm just thinking, can't they just reply and say, well, we didn't get that email because you broke all of our computers, so I couldn't respond to that. Like, do you think that response is going to fly? Maybe?
I don't think so. I don't think so. No. But we'll keep after this because I will be interested to see if they actually follow through on any litigation. I don't think they will. I assume that insurance companies will get involved. There will be a settlement. Everyone will go home happy, or at least less unhappy, and that'll be that. This week, the NTSB held, I don't know if I want to use the word rare, but kind of rare public investigative hearings. The last time they held one of these, I believe, was for the East Palestine train accident. So public investigative hearings, we've talked about this in the context of Boeing being sanctioned by the NTSB, but here's actually what happened this week. The NTSB called a bunch of witnesses from Boeing, the FAA, Spirit Aerosystems, the machinists union that actually manufactures the aircraft and puts these things together, along with representatives from the pilots unions, the flight attendants unions, and others. And the NTSB board and those party representatives to the investigation asked questions of the witnesses. And we didn't learn anything hugely revelatory. There was no like aha moment.
No smoking gun.
And we still don't know who removed the door plug.
I don't think we're ever going to find that out. If we were going to figure that out, it would have been known already.
I think you're right, Jason. But what we do know now is more about the processes, the paperwork, the how things were supposed to happen versus how they did happen in this case. And we also, I think, for me, the most insightful part of these 2 days has been the real, very clear illumination of the distrust of Boeing's workforce, of Boeing's management.
Yeah. And I think for me, the biggest takeaway is not just the acknowledgement that the Spirit Aerosystems employees in Boeing's Renton factory have a completely different set of procedures and processes and systems.
That was crazy to me.
But it's also how they know that Boeing doesn't want them there. Boeing employees do not want them there, because if they're there and they're doing work, it means Spirit itself delivered something defective that needs to be worked on. But one of the quotes that was pulled out from John Ostrower in the Air Currents live, old school style live blog of this event, the quote is, well, basically, we're the cockroaches of the factory. And that's a quote from one of the Spirit contractors describing their role in the Renton facility. And it is kind of crazy to think about that the people doing the work on the fuselages in Boeing's own factory, they think of themselves as cockroaches because Boeing doesn't want them there. And they're scurrying around all over the place doing the work that should have never had to be done in the first place. And yeah, that's got to take a bit of a psychological toll, I think, on those people doing that work, knowing that you are the lowest of the low. You're thought of as a cockroach. You don't have any of the systems that benefit the actual Boeing employees, while they have sophisticated tracking applications and systems and reporting tools. You're working off an Excel spreadsheet. And the only way you can know what you have to do next is if you refresh that spreadsheet and compare it against the old version of the spreadsheet to see what has popped up on it. It's just got to be the first thing that Boeing management resolves when it absorbs Spirit back into being a wholly owned Boeing subsidiary. Is these people need to be Boeing employees, and they need to have the same tools, resources, and psychological safety that any other Boeing employee does, because clearly what's happening now is not good. And then you read other quotes. This is one of my favorite ones, when there was so much discussion about SMS, which is safety management systems, and how clearly what's in place at Boeing is not working. And in one of the interviews performed presumably by the NTSB, I'll just read the whole quote here. When asked by investigators what SMS means to them, the employee responded with, and I quote, "Safety management system would just be something to, for me, a safety management system looks more like a system to, for safety, as in the airplane in regards to, I don't know. Actually, I don't even know that word. I think it's just what they have like on the walls, ... So presumably that person trailed off there. But they don't even know what SMS is. It kind of sounds like they think this individual thinks it's just like, a corporate motto or slogan of like safety management system for you, follow it and you'll be safe, and not knowing that it's not like corporate lingo. It's an actual system that's supposed to keep employees and, importantly, airline passengers safe. And it's really frighteningly eye-opening.
Yeah. Well,
I think you just summed it up.
Kelly Ortberg starts tomorrow, so good luck.
Good luck. Yeah, I don't believe he was present at the NTSB hearing, because his job does not start until the day after, which makes sense. You don't want to have you don't want to have the new guy starting day one in an NTSB hearing when he had no control over anything that was going on. But yeah, it's also still going on. By the way, they are hours and hours behind today because there's a lot to talk about, and also apparently the air conditioning is broken in the hearing room today, so it's both a heated hearing physically and spiritually, I guess. I'm not really sure, but that sounds miserable.
That does sound miserable.
In DC in August.
Yeah. Just no,
none of that.
And more no. Yeah. So Ortberg starts this week. He'll be one day in by the time the podcast comes out this week. And in addition to the commercial aircraft side of things that is not going well, Space is also not going well for Boeing at the moment. And we don't usually talk about these things, but we talked about it before. So I feel like an update is at least the responsible thing to do.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly what we said in episode 269 because our show notes, our internal show notes, just say toss Starliner into the ocean and leave it there, which kind of seems to be the going attitude because NASA today with Boeing Space provided an update that they are now seriously thinking about returning the Starliner crew on SpaceX Falcon not until February. I think it was February
Yeah.
of 2025. So an 8-day mission will now possibly be 7 to 8 months. They don't know yet. This is a decision NASA says they will make by the middle of August, which is rapidly approaching.
The middle of August is next week.
Next week. It's going to be an absolutely gutting blow to Boeing if on the very first crewed mission, Starliner, they basically have to abandon ship and literally strand astronauts in the International Space Station for 8 months. And Boeing and NASA will continue to say they are not stranded there. If an emergency evacuation event occurred, they would still use Starliner now and I guess cross their fingers and hope it all works out. But this is just yet another embarrassment for Boeing that the new guy has got to go clean up.
I wish him all the best. And we've talked about this before. It's easy to kind of pick these things out and point them out. But at the end of the day, Jason and I are both sitting here wanting them to succeed. I mean, we would much rather be doing a podcast right now about the huge competition between Boeing and Airbus for, next generation narrow bodies. Who's going to build the next type of propulsion system? And are we going to see a 777-10 that can carry, a billion people or something like that? I mean, I would much rather be talking about those things than these.
Yeah. By the way, I'm going to correct myself because I know if I don't, we're going to get hate mail. It's SpaceX Dragon. Falcon is the name of the rocket. Dragon is the crew capsule thingy that they would be returning to. Or presumably maybe Soyuz? I don't know. I don't think they specified. But it's looking increasingly unlikely that they'll return in Starliner.
This is why we need a space elevator.
That would be great. Let's get right on that.
Let's come back to Earth, shall we? So, speaking of problems, I guess, Spirit Airlines has joined the list of other airlines that are now deferring A320neo family deliveries. They don't want the aircraft because the engines don't stay on the wings long enough. This is A320neo family aircraft that are equipped with the Pratt & Whitney geared turbofan engines. So Spirit Airlines says, you know what, we don't want them right now. You guys can hang on to them and we'll take them at some point when you have figured out the problems. They've deferred these deliveries until 2030 and 2031 that were previously scheduled to arrive between July 2025 and the end of 2026.
Yeah, to be fair, Spirit's got a lot of other things going on, and I'm sure the engine reliability is just a part of why they are deferring these aircraft, just like JetBlue doing the same.
Sure.
It is not simply because engine no worky, it's because airline no have money at the same time. But I'm sure the Spirit and the JetBlues of the world deferring deliveries out for years is going to be a boon for United and other airlines out there who will, I'm sure, fight tooth and nail to get those delivery slots because these were presumably aircraft unattainable until sometime in the 2030s. Now suddenly you've got dozens and dozens of them opening up, and I'm sure Airbus is going to charge accordingly.
On the other side of that coin, Wizz Air is saying we're getting our engines back faster from Pratt & Whitney, so we're going to wind down our wet leasing. Wizz Air is going to try and be done with wet leased capacity by the end of October. Pratt & Whitney now turning around engine inspections on the PW1000G engines faster. So that's great news. I hope that that's not just for Wizz Air.
I was going to say, we've talked about this before, where the 900-pound gorilla in the room gets what they want, while the little mice scurrying around with a couple airplanes get just the bare minimum, and the ones in the middle get screwed entirely. Kind of lending some truth to that theory, but good for Wizz Air. But I also hope it's not because they trimmed down their schedule dramatically enough that they no longer need those wet leased aircraft on top of getting other aircraft back. I think, again, it's probably a combination of both, but any good news about getting these Pratt engines back in service fast is just exactly that, good news, and we'll take it.
So this was Yosef Verdi who was speaking on the fiscal first quarter, not first quarter of the year, but fiscal first quarter for Wizz's results. And the way that this works now is interesting, and it might come back to bite them, but we'll see how things go. So what he's saying is if the engines need work, the shop visit will still last almost a year, about 300 days on average. But they have the ability to do quick turns now. So Pratt & Whitney has identified, we can look at an engine and say, okay, we only need to keep it for 50 to 60 days, he says.
Oh, is that it?
That's it. But there's a catch. Those engines need to go back into the shop fairly quickly.
Did they define what fairly quickly is? That's not really, a trivial thing, taking an engine off wing and shipping it off to a facility. That's
right. So the idea here is that the engine is off the wing for about the same amount of time, but it's broken up in chunks.
Okay.
So instead of being off the wing 300 days at a time, it's off the wing 50 to 60 days at a time, a few times a year, is what it sounds like.
This just sounds like you're taking a bad thing and splitting up that bad thing to equal parts. It's still
exactly
bad,
what you're doing.
But it's better in a way. Man, this is upsetting.
This is going to go on for the next couple of years.
Cool.
So, but I mean, any good news, I guess, is good news where you can find it. IAG has been trying to acquire Air Europa for I don't know how long.
I don't know, but continuing the trend of good news, IAG has withdrawn its proposed acquisition of Air Europa. And I think this is done. Good news for everyone, especially if you're the European Commission who said, hey, this is bad. You already tried to do this in 2021. It was bad then. Trying to do it again now, it's even worse now because Air Europa's all airlines are in a better state than they were in the middle of the pandemic. So whatever the impacts of it was going to be in 2021, they are worse now. And the remedies you are offering to make it less bad are in there, I quote, not fully addresses our competition concerns. They didn't really elaborate on that, but yet don't really want to see the Spain's number 1 and number 2 airline group gobbling up the number 3 airline. So I get it. This seems to be exactly what antitrust and anti-competitive blocking of a merger should be. Why should the same company be allowed to own the number 1, the number 2, and the number 3 largest airline in a company? This just seems like common sense in a country. Seems like common sense.
IAG had said that they would give up 52% of Air Europa's routes as a way to get the thing through. And the EC said, no, we're
not enough. Not going to do it.
Let's stick with some good news and stick with IAG and note that Aer Lingus, having completed an agreement with their pilots, which sees the pilots get a raise of, I believe, 17.75% and a bit easier work rule, more time off during the summer and things like that. They now want to see if they can get their XLRs back from the parent group.
Isn't one of them not even painted in the Iberia livery? So, they could just get that one right back?
I mean, theoretically, they could easily transfer it back over. The first one, or first 2, I guess, will still go to Iberia, but there are others that could then, I suppose, easily be given back to Aer Lingus. Hopefully that happens. I mean, they've got 14 on order from the group, so they've got some room to play with, but I'm not sure how quickly they'll come back. But it seems to me that now that they have that pilot agreement in place, then they're in pretty good shape.
Good for them.
News that broke today before we recorded is that Cathay Pacific has ordered 30 A330neos.
With options for 30 more. These
Hey,
are
hey.
of course, the 900 variant. No one really orders the 800, but Cathay's got a lot of A330 COs, 300s in its fleet that it needs to replace. They're getting a bit old, and these are. It's funny to say that these A330s are for their regional operation. I guess what
Mm-hmm.
would have been Cathay Dragon in the past, but yeah, this is exciting. A whole new fleet of Neos going to Cathay Pacific for regional operations, and it will come with a new business class, I think fully flat business instead of anything you would think would be regional. I think Saudia has the same kind of thing where they had the derated A330 300s that were purely just for like regional operations, even though they were really, really nice on the inside. So I just love when you get a nice wide body with a nice product like that. And this, it does an hour flight every day.
Well, it's like Singapore's regional 787-10s.
Yes, air quoting regional, because the regional jets I fly are not that.
They're designated for regional routes, and regional is a relative definition here.
Yes.
Let's see, where do we go next? Jason.
Yo.
When you take your A220 in for maintenance, and they say, hey, it's missing this pin, you think to yourself, okay, how important could a pin be? In this case, this pin, if it's missing, your landing gear could collapse.
You should not do that. You should make sure that pin is there. I mean, funny enough, the opposite happens with pins. If you leave a pin in on a flight that's departing, landing gear won't go up. It will just stay there. So pins are really important on your airplanes. You got to check those.
Yes. So Transport Canada has issued an urgent emergency airworthiness directive and said, hey, make sure that your pintle fuse pin is where it's supposed to be.
The what?
You heard me.
Okay, fair enough.
The pintle fuse pin. This is a pin in the main landing gear. And if it's missing, the pin can result in a, quote, significant redistribution of loads in the landing gear, and then the landing gear can potentially collapse. So you get 24 cycles on your A220 to see if the pin is there.
So okay, and if you find any A220s where the landing gear has just vanished, you might know what happened.
You might know. So remember we talked about the thing that didn't really matter because it wasn't actually the thing that Virgin said it was?
Oh, you got to be more specific than that.
Yeah, that's fair. So Virgin completed its first all SAF flight. And they were marketing
the 50-50 thing.
No. This was their 100% thing.
Oh, okay.
So this was the first transatlantic.
Oh, right.
SAF flight. Virgin said, hey, we're going all the way. It's 100% SAF. We dinged it for saying, well, it's not commercial. It was, by invite only. You couldn't just buy a ticket. And there were some caveats here and everything like that. Well, the UK advertising regulator is mad at Virgin for entirely different reasons that we didn't really cover because we've covered them every other time we've talked about sustainable aviation fuel, in the sense that it's not actually sustainable. It's just a marketing term. Well, the UK advertising regulator says that a significant proportion of listeners would understand the reference to mean that the fuel used was 100% sustainable, rather than the aircraft flying only on sustainable fuel. So they didn't even address the fact that sustainable aviation fuel isn't in fact sustainable. They're saying people would have thought that the fuel was 100% sustainable, rather than the aircraft is only flying on sustainable aviation fuel. So this is interesting to me that this continues to happen, because this is not the first time that sustainable language has been dinged by regulators when airlines have either advertised or marketed sustainable activities.
It's the second time I can think of it in recent history. I think Lufthansa Group had an ad that was taken down either in the UK again or the EU as a whole, again with regulators saying this isn't really what's going on. You're misrepresenting. Flying on an airplane is not actively reducing your carbon footprint, no matter what the airline might want you to think. So this is at least the second time we've seen a sustainability focused ad for an airline swatted down by regulators. So it's good that they're paying attention. I wish they would pay attention to ads for other industries to this degree, but at least they're paying attention to something.
Yeah. Sticking with Virgin for a moment, last week we talked about their order for 7 A330neos that was completed on an A330neo. I still think that's really cool, and more things like that should happen more often. But when Airbus reported their order and deliveries last week post air show and at the end of July, it's now noted that Virgin has said, we're not going to take 2 of the A350-1000s that we said we were going to take. So they've cut their order book for the A350-1000s. I'm sure those deposits have been moved over to the A330neos, but 2 fewer A350s coming to the Virgin fleet.
Oh, that's too bad. That's a nice airplane. Didn't Virgin Atlantic order the A380 at one point, like a forever ago?
Weren't they one of like the first?
I think they were. Man, that would have been, what an alternate reality that would have been. Too bad.
There are so many airlines that would have been fascinating to watch operate the A380.
That would have been crazy. Too bad. A future that never will be.
No. Okay, let's close out with a couple things that I thought were interesting this week. Norse operated its longest flight yet, with the first nonstop flight from a Scandinavian country to Australia, flying 16 and a half hours from Oslo to Darwin. That was a positioning flight for a return charter to Rome. That got me thinking, which airlines have flown to all 7 continents? Because Norse last year flew a 787 to Antarctica, which brings them up to 6. I don't think they've ever flown to South America. But I was thinking, well, what airlines have flown to all 7 continents? And so the list I have so far is SAS, Icelandair, Titan, and I don't know if there are others.
I mean, it's tricky because I'm sure there are lots of airlines who have unintentionally flown places like diversions or charter flights that they don't ordinarily operate to. But Antarctica is not really the kind of place you just pop in to say hi. You got to be pretty intentional about flying there. So I can't recall any other airlines. Plenty of private jet operators. I'm sure all sorts of private jets end up going to the research stations. Troll Research Station, one of our favorites, of course. Yeah, I can't name any others beyond that list.
So if you can, email us at podcast@fr24.com and let us know if there are other airlines that have operated.
Belgium fly to Antarctica, a charter one time?
Probably.
I think they did. And I bet they float all over the place using those 330, 340, 300s. I bet we need to add them to the list. We're going to figure that out.
That one's a live and a late edition. But if there are others, email us at podcast@fr24.com and let us know. Jason, you had one bullet point that you wanted to talk about. I saw a picture of this and I thought to myself, oh, that looks comfortable. What's going on?
Yeah. Indigo, one of the largest airlines in India, has previously announced that they were going to install true business class on some of their fleet, which again is a rising trend among ultra low cost and low cost carriers adding premium cabins. And we saw what they're going to be installing on the A321neo, operating between large cities, I believe, within India. And I can't imagine it won't do international flights at some point, but it's not just like a Eurobiz or extra legroom economy. It's a legit regional first class style seat with USB power and the works. It's just a really, really fascinating time in the low-cost airline space, seeing them go premium and offering something very dramatically different than what they've ever offered in the past. We saw that with Frontier. Now that we saw that with Spirit, we're seeing that with JetBlue. Now we're seeing that with spread over to India with Indigo. And I just think it's truly fascinating. And we'll post a link to the image. I think I've only seen one picture of it, but they had a very large event welcoming it. And it's exciting time for airlines in India right now.
Yeah. I honestly can't think of a more exciting market right now in the aviation industry than India. I mean, the potential for growth is just so massive, and the potential for innovation is just so incredible that I'm really excited about this. And I think we'll be focusing, more going forward on what's happening there, because it's going to become such a big part of the industry. And I think we're going to start seeing Indian Airlines driving some of the things that other airlines have historically driven with manufacturers, whether it's aircraft manufacturers or seat manufacturers or what have you, where the market is big enough to support kind of dominant airlines where they say, okay, build this for us, please. We're a few years away from that, but that's kind of where I see things going eventually.
Yeah, and that sounds crazy, but that's actually exactly how it works. Those who are the biggest in the room and have the most say and can place the biggest orders first, they get to dictate, by and large, what an aircraft will be like, what the specs are, what the performance is, how it suits their needs. And yeah, it just certainly seems like an outsized airline like Indigo could possibly do that for whatever replaces the 320 CO family. Or Neo family, sorry.
Well, I think we know what replaces the CEO family.
Yes, we do.
We don't need to guess at that one. But yeah, no, I think you're right. Okay, that was episode 280. By the time this podcast comes out and you've listened to the whole thing, it could all be moot. We don't know. But we'll be back next week with more aviation news, whether anything has happened or more NOTAMs have been issued that only affect a single flight. I just don't know. But until then, I am Ian Petchnick, here as always with
Jason Rabinowitz. Thanks for listening.